July 1941, Vichy, France. 31-year-old Marie-Madeleine Fourcade receives the message that will define her life. Georges Loustono-Laco has been arrested. She now commands Alliance, the largest spy network in France. 3,000 agents across occupied territory. Every major port, every rail line, every German fortification. The Gestapo calls them Noah's Ark for their animal code names. Her code name, Hérisson, the Hedgehog. She has no military training, no espionage experience. The Germans are hunting her network systematically, arresting, torturing, executing agents weekly. Within 3 years, her operatives' radio transmissions will save an estimated 100 Allied bombers and change the war. But first, she must survive. Marie-Madeleine Fourcade was never supposed to be a spy. Born in Marseille in 1909, she grew up in Shanghai's French concession where her father worked for the French Maritime Service. She attended convent schools and studied piano, dreaming of concert stages and Chopin. At 17, she fell in love with a French military intelligence officer and moved to Morocco, where she learned Arabic, helped deliver babies at local clinics, and absorbed the fundamentals of intelligence work by her husband's side. The marriage failed, but her adventurous spirit didn't. Back in France by the early 1930s, separated and raising 2 children alone, she took up rally car driving, learned to fly airplanes, and became a journalist for Radio Cité. Scandalous pursuits for a woman in conservative French society. Everything changed at an evening salon in 1936. She met Georges Loustono-Laco, a military officer obsessed with the coming war. He recognized something in her, a combination of courage, intelligence, and willingness to defy convention. He recruited her to work on his newspaper, L'Ordre National, warning France about Hitler's preparations for war. When German tanks rolled into France in June 1940, Loustono-Laco transformed his network of contacts into something more dangerous, a spy organization codenamed Alliance. He made Fourcade his chief of staff, but didn't tell British intelligence in London that his second-in-command was a woman. Her first mission, divide unoccupied France into sections, recruit agents for each section, build an intelligence network from scratch. She succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. By July 1941, Alliance had grown to 3,000 agents, infiltrating every major French port and sizable town. They came from every segment of society, military officers who'd refused to surrender, government clerks with access to occupation records, architects who'd built coastal fortifications, shopkeepers who overheard German conversations, fishermen who watched U-boat movements, housewives who counted troop trains, doctors who treated wounded Germans, plumbers who serviced military installations, students who distributed pamphlets, bus drivers who transported agents, priests who heard confessions. 30% were women, the highest proportion of any French resistance organization. Loustono-Laco, whose code name was Navarre, devised a security measure that would give the network its legendary status. Every agent adopted an animal code name. Fourcade chose Hérisson, Hedgehog. Small, unthreatening in appearance, but tough enough that even a lion would hesitate to bite. Then came July 1941. The Gestapo arrested Navarre. Within hours, British intelligence officer Kenneth Cohen radioed from London. Fourcade was now la patronne, the boss of the largest Allied intelligence network in occupied France. She was 31 years old, a mother of 2 who'd sent her children to relatives and boarding schools because resistance work demanded everything. She had no military rank, no formal espionage training, no authority except what she could command through sheer force of personality. The agents under her command included military men decades her senior who'd fought in the First World War. Many didn't even know she was a woman until Navarre's arrest forced her to reveal herself. Some questioned whether they should follow her. She answered their doubts by continuing operations without missing a single transmission cycle to London. The technology she inherited was primitive and deadly. The British Special Operations Executive supplied suitcase radios, large, heavy devices requiring substantial electrical power and long transmission times. Each broadcast lasted 15 to 30 minutes, during which German radio detection vans prowled occupied France, searching for signals. The vans could triangulate a radio's position in 20 to 25 minutes. The math was brutal: finish your transmission and evacuate in under 20 minutes, or the Gestapo arrives. Statistics proved the danger. Time 0.5s. The average radio operator survived 4 to 6 weeks before capture. Fourcade had approximately 50 working radios for 3,000 agents. Every transmission meant gambling an agent's life against the value of the intelligence being sent. Every captured operator meant torture, executions of other agents whose names were extracted during interrogation, and a hole in the network that took weeks to repair. She adapted through constant movement. Headquarters relocated every 2 to 3 weeks. She changed her hair color, clothing, and identity documents regularly. She memorized the identities and locations of hundreds of key agents, knowing that if the Gestapo captured and tortured her, the entire network would collapse. She carried cyanide pills, not for herself, but to give agents who requested them, those who feared they couldn't withstand torture without betraying their comrades. The weight of command manifested in simple statistics. By war's end, the Gestapo would arrest and execute 438 Alliance agents. Every week brought reports of new arrests. Every transmission to London included updates about agents who'd disappeared, been caught, or died under interrogation. Kenneth Cohen, her MI6 controller in London, told her in 1943, "You've gone on long past the safety limits. According to the law of averages, an underground leader can't last more than 6 months. You've lasted over 2.5 years. It's sheer witchcraft." But it wasn't witchcraft. It was ruthless operational security combined with the Gestapo's blind spot regarding women. German intelligence couldn't conceive that a woman was commanding such an extensive operation. Their reports described Hedgehog using masculine pronouns, assuming Alliance's leader was male. Fourcade exploited this assumption, using her gender as camouflage in a patriarchal society that systematically underestimated women's capabilities. Alliance's initial assignments focused on German naval operations, coastal fortifications, and troop movements. The intelligence flowed to London via those dangerous radio transmissions, U-boat sailing schedules from agents in port cities, gun emplacement locations from architects forced to build them, Wehrmacht division deployments from railway clerks counting cargo manifests. British commanders praised Alliance's accuracy and detail. But by 1942 and into 1943, fragmentary reports began, arriving about something new. German officers mentioned secret weapons in development. Scientists and engineers traveled to facilities along the Baltic coast. Construction crews built mysterious launch sites across northern France. Rumors spoke of flying bombs and rockets traveling faster than sound. British scientific intelligence, led by physicist Reginald V. Jones, needed technical specifications to determine if these rumors represented genuine threats or German propaganda designed to intimidate the Allies. The mission evolved. The Alliance now had to obtain details about weapons that didn't yet exist in Allied arsenals, technology beyond current understanding, specifications that German security guarded with absolute priority. Fourcade needed an agent who could infiltrate German scientific and military circles, extract technical information without arousing suspicion, and transmit that intelligence back to London before the Gestapo caught them. She found that agent in a 24-year-old linguist named Jeannie Rousseau, whose code name would become Amniarix after an ancient Gallic warrior woman who'd fought the Romans. Rousseau's assignment would prove to be the most consequential intelligence operation of Alliance's entire war, leading directly to the bombing raid that saved those 100 Allied bombers and changed the invasion timeline. But first, Rousseau had to convince German officers to reveal secrets about weapons that could win the war. Jeannie Rousseau didn't look like a spy. At 24 years old, she stood barely 5 feet tall, with delicate features, and an innocent smile that made German officers think of their sisters back home. She'd graduated first in her class from the prestigious École Libre des Sciences Politiques in Paris just as German tanks rolled into the city in June 1940. Fluent in German, English, Spanish, and Italian, she took a job as an interpreter for a French industrial association that worked with German military procurement offices. Every day she walked into rooms where Wehrmacht officers discussed production schedules, supply chains, and technical specifications. They talked freely in front of her, assuming a young Frenchwoman couldn't possibly understand or care about the strategic implications of what they were saying. They were catastrophically wrong. Georges Lamarck recruited her in 1941 during a chance meeting on a darkened night train. He'd known her at university, remembered her gift for languages and her photographic memory. Time 0.5s. He was building a small intelligence network called the Druids, and he needed someone who could infiltrate German circles without raising suspicion. She agreed instantly. Her code name became Amniarix, after an ancient Gallic warrior woman who'd fought the Roman legions. Within months, she'd positioned herself as a trusted interpreter at the Hotel Majestic, German military headquarters in Paris, where Wehrmacht officers planned operations across occupied Europe. She gained access to restricted departments working on special projects, areas where even other Germans weren't permitted. Her technique was disarmingly simple: be charming, appear naive, ask questions that seemed innocent, and remember everything. By 1943, she'd made friends with several German officers who'd known her before the war at the beach resort town of Dinard, where wealthy families spent summers. They vouched for her loyalty and introduced her to their colleagues, engineers and scientists, working on projects so secret that even mentioning them could mean execution. One evening at a social gathering, an officer mentioned a new weapon being developed at a facility called Peenemünde on Germany's Baltic coast. Rousseau played her part perfectly. She expressed polite disbelief, suggesting the Germans couldn't possibly have developed such technology. The officer, insulted by her skepticism, insisted it was real. She asked innocent questions, pretending not to understand the technical details. He explained further, eager to prove German superiority. She'd discovered the entry point. Over the following weeks, she refined her approach. I teased them, taunted them, looked at them wide-eyed, insisted they must be mad when they spoke of this astounding new weapon that flew over vast distances, much faster than any airplane, she later recalled. I kept saying, what you are telling me cannot be true. I must have said that 100 times. She was inviting them to mansplain their weapons program to her, and they obliged enthusiastically. One officer, determined to convince her, sketched rocket designs from memory. She memorized the drawings, the dimensions, the technical specifications he casually mentioned. Another officer revealed that the weapon traveled at over 3,500 miles per hour, faster than sound itself, impossible for any fighter or anti-aircraft gun to intercept. A third mentioned the warhead weight, 2,150 pounds of high explosives, enough to destroy an entire city block with a single hit. The weapon had a designation V2, standing for Vergeltungswaffe 2, Vengeance Weapon 2. There was also a V1, a smaller flying bomb, powered by a primitive jet engine that could be launched from ramps along the French coast toward London. German officers boasted that production facilities were being built to manufacture 2,000 V1s per day once the program reached full capacity. 2,000 per day. If those numbers were accurate, the mathematical implications were staggering. London had a population of 8 million. 2,000 bombs per day, each carrying a ton of explosives, meant the city could be systematically destroyed within weeks. The officers spoke confidently about the timeline, operational deployment planned for late 1943 or early 1944, just as the Allies were preparing their invasion of Europe. Rousseau understood she'd stumbled onto one of the war's most critical secrets. She couldn't take notes, too dangerous if she was searched. She couldn't photograph documents, she had no camera and no access to dark rooms. Everything had to be memorized with perfect accuracy, then transmitted verbally to Georges Lamarck at safe houses on the left bank. She'd meet him after work, recite technical specifications from memory, describe the rocket dimensions, repeat the production timelines, name the officers she'd spoken with. Lamarck recognized the intelligence's strategic value immediately. He passed her reports to the Alliance network, which encoded them and transmitted them to London via those dangerous radio broadcasts that risked exposing the entire operation. In September 1943, her most detailed report reached London. It became known as the Wachtel Report, named after Colonel Max Wachtel, the German officer commanding the V1 program whom Rousseau had identified through casual conversations. The report provided precise details about operations at Peenemünde, the facility's layout, the testing schedule, the rocket specifications, and critically, the planned launch locations for V1 sites stretching from Brittany to the Netherlands. British physicist Reginald V. Jones, the chief scientific intelligence advisor, read the report with growing astonishment. Most intelligence reports were fragmentary, vague, contradictory. This one contained engineering-level detail that could only come from someone with direct access to German military planning. When Jones asked about the source, his contacts told him only that the intelligence came from an agent codenamed Hérisson, described as one of the most remarkable young women of her generation. Jones cross-referenced Rousseau's intelligence with reconnaissance photographs of Peenemünde taken by RAF photo reconnaissance mosquitoes flying at 40,000 feet. The buildings she'd described matched the aerial images. The dimensions she'd provided for the rockets corresponded to mysterious cylindrical objects visible in the photographs. The testing schedule she'd reported aligned with increased German security around the facility. Every verifiable detail checked out. Jones prepared a briefing for Winston Churchill, arguing that the V-weapon program represented an existential threat to Britain and the planned invasion of Europe. If the Germans deployed these weapons 6 months ahead of the actual timeline, say by December 1943 instead of June 1944, the invasion would become impossible. German rockets would target the British ports where invasion forces were assembling, the airfields where bombers and fighters were stationed, the supply depots, stockpiling equipment. Estimated casualties before the invasion even launched, potentially 200,000 Allied personnel. Churchill authorized Operation Hydra, a maximum-effort bombing raid on Peenemünde involving nearly 600 heavy bombers. The decision carried enormous risk. Peenemünde lay deep in German-controlled territory on the Baltic coast, over 600 miles from Britain. Bombers would fly for hours through hostile airspace where German night fighters prowled. The low-altitude bombing run required to hit the facility accurately would expose crews to sustained anti-aircraft fire. RAF Bomber Command estimated they'd lose 5% of the attacking force, 30 bombers, 210 aircrew killed. But the alternative, allowing V-weapons to become operational on Germany's timeline, meant potentially losing the entire war. The mathematics were brutal but clear. Sacrifice 30 bombers and 200 airmen to save hundreds of bombers and hundreds of thousands of invasion troops. The intelligence that enabled this decision came from a young woman who'd used charm, feigned ignorance, and a photographic memory to extract secrets from officers who'd systematically underestimated her. Reginald V. Jones later wrote, AMNIARIX's reports stand brilliantly in the history of intelligence, and 3 concentration camps, Ravensbrück, Königsberg, and Torgau, could not break her. He was referring to what would happen to Rousseau in April 1944, just before D-Day, when the Gestapo finally caught her during an attempted evacuation to London. But even under interrogation and torture, she never revealed the secret she'd stolen. The Germans suspected she was a spy, but couldn't prove it. They sent her to concentration camps, moved her from Ravensbrück to Torgau to Königsberg as punishment for organizing prisoner protests. She survived all 3, was rescued by the Swedish Red Cross shortly before war's end, and lived to age 98, dying in 2017. But in August 1943, as RAF Bomber Command assembled 596 heavy bombers for Operation Hydra, Rousseau was still free, still operating in Paris, still extracting intelligence from German officers who couldn't conceive that the friendly young interpreter was systematically dismantling their secret weapons program. The bombers would prove whether her intelligence was accurate. If she was right, the raid would delay V-weapon deployment by months, buying time for the invasion. If she was wrong, 280 British airmen would die for nothing. Everything now depended on whether 600 bombers could destroy a facility located 600 miles deep in enemy territory, defended by some of Germany's best night fighter squadrons, based on intelligence obtained through conversation and memorized by a woman standing 5 feet tall. August 17, 1943 afternoon, RAF Bomber Command Headquarters, High Wycombe, England. Air Chief Marshal Sir Arthur Harris stood before the massive wall map of Europe, his finger tracing a route across the North Sea to a tiny dot on Germany's Baltic coast. Peenemünde, a facility barely 3 miles long, 600 miles deep into enemy territory, protected by some of the Luftwaffe's deadliest night fighter squadrons. His staff officers waited for the order. Maximum effort, Harris said. Every available heavy bomber. The number shocked even experienced planners, 596 aircraft, 324 Lancasters, 218 Halifaxes, 54 Sterlings. The largest single-target raid in RAF Bomber Command's history. Not Berlin. Not Hamburg. Not the Ruhr Industrial Valley, a research facility most people had never heard of. Across England, squadrons received the alert. Ground crews began preparations immediately, fuel trucks rolled toward hard stands, bomb trolleys wheeled high explosives and incendiaries from storage bunkers, armorers loaded ammunition belts into gun turrets. The Avro Lancaster represented the peak of British bomber design, 4 Rolls-Royce Merlin engines producing 5,120 horsepower combined, capable of 287 miles per hour at altitude, with a maximum bomb capacity of 22,000 pounds. 10 tons of destruction delivered per aircraft. 7-man crews, pilot, flight engineer, navigator, bomb aimer, wireless operator, mid-upper gunner, tail gunner, had trained for months to operate these complex machines while being shot at. The Handley Page Halifax flew alongside, slightly slower at 282 miles per hour, with a 13,000-pound bomb load, but equipped with reliable Bristol Hercules radial engines that often brought crews home when the temperamental Merlins failed. Both aircraft types bristled with defensive armament, 8.303 Browning machine guns in multiple turrets, but against German night fighters equipped with 20mm cannon, these machine guns offered limited protection. Bomber crews knew the statistics. Average survival was fewer than 20 missions. Tonight would be number 17 for many crews. At RAF Ludford Magna, home of 101 Squadron, George Dunn walked into the briefing room with his 6 crewmates. Halifax pilot, age 21, already a veteran of 16 operations over enemy territory. The room filled quickly, 100 aircrew, faces young but eyes old. The intelligence officer pulled back the curtain covering the wall map. A collective gasp. The red ribbon stretched across the North Sea, deep into Germany, ending at a location most had never heard of. Quite a hum of astonishment went round the briefing room, Dunn later recalled. "I thought, what are we doing, having a maximum effort on a little tiny place like that?" The intelligence officer began explaining. Peenemünde contained German secret weapons research facilities. Rockets capable of reaching Britain from launch sites in occupied France and Germany. Weapons traveling faster than sound, impossible to intercept, impossible to shoot down. The facility housed the scientists designing these weapons, the engineers building them, the test stands where they were fired. Aerial reconnaissance photographs appeared on the screen, mysterious cylindrical objects on launch pads, complex buildings, what appeared to be assembly facilities. What the intelligence officer didn't mention, how British intelligence obtained such detailed information. Alliance network operations remained classified. Johnny Rousseau's name was never spoken. The crews simply understood this target mattered enough to risk 600 aircraft and 4,200 lives. Then came the mission parameters. Standard operating altitude for heavy bombers, 15 to 20,000 feet, high enough to provide some protection from flak, high enough to give crews time to bail out if hit. Tonight's altitude, 8,000 feet, less than 2 miles up. Low enough to ensure bombing accuracy against small targets. Low enough for German anti-aircraft guns to track visually in moonlight. Low enough that a damaged bomber had almost no altitude for emergency procedures. The tactical innovation was equally dangerous. Group Captain John Searby of 83 Squadron would employ a new technique called master bombing. He'd orbit over Peenemünde throughout the entire attack, assess bombing accuracy through smoke and fires, radio course corrections to incoming bomber streams. Searby would be the most exposed aircraft in the raid, circling over the target for nearly an hour while flak and fighters tried to kill him. The plan included one more critical element, deception. A small force of fast Mosquito bombers would conduct a diversionary raid on Berlin just before the Peenemünde attack began. German night fighter controllers would see formations heading toward the capital and scramble their squadrons to intercept. While fighters chased Mosquitoes over Berlin, the main force would strike Peenemünde 90 miles north. If the timing worked, losses would be cut in half. If it failed, if German controllers recognized the deception too quickly, 60 to 80 bombers wouldn't return. 420 to 560 dead aircrew. Bomber Command Doctrine defined acceptable losses at 5% per operation. 596 bombers times 5% equals approximately 30 aircraft lost. 210 men dead or so. These weren't abstract numbers to the crews sitting in that briefing room. They were friends, roommates, fellow pilots who'd trained together at flight school, navigators who'd calculated routes through hostile airspace on dozens of previous missions, gunners who'd shot down German fighters, wireless operators who'd transmitted distress calls while their aircraft burned around them. George Dunn and his crew needed 13 more missions to complete their required tour of 30 operations. Every sortie represented a mathematical gamble with death. Survive tonight. Fly again tomorrow. Hope probability holds through 13 more coin flips. The average crew didn't make it. But the alternative to attacking Peenemünde was worse, much worse. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, newly appointed Supreme Commander of Allied forces preparing for the invasion of Europe, had received intelligence assessments about German V-weapons. The conclusions were stark. If these weapons became operational by December 1943, 6 months before the planned invasion date, the invasion would become impossible. German rockets would systematically destroy British ports where invasion forces assembled: Southampton, Portsmouth, Dover. They'd crater the airfields housing the fighters and bombers supporting the assault. Hundreds of bases across southern England. They'd obliterate supply depots, stockpiling equipment, ammunition, and fuel for the operation. Intelligence suggested German production facilities planned to manufacture 2,000 V-1 flying bombs per day at peak capacity. 2,000 per day. Even if only half reached their targets, that meant 1,000 bombs daily hitting British infrastructure for 6 months. 180,000 strikes. The invasion would die before a single soldier reached France. The calculation became brutally simple: sacrifice 30 bombers and 210 airmen tonight, or potentially lose 200,000 invasion troops when V-weapons destroy the assault force before it launches. Accept casualties from trained crews who'd already survived months of operations, or watch the war extend for years, with mounting deaths in the millions. The numbers forced the decision. RAF Bomber Command would attack Peenemünde with maximum force, accept the losses, trust that intelligence extracted through social engineering and transmitted via primitive radios was accurate enough to justify what was about to happen. As twilight settled across England, ground crews completed final preparations. Bombs loaded, high explosives to destroy structures, incendiaries to start fires guiding later waves. Fuel tanks topped to maximum capacity for the 1,200-mile round trip. Machine gun ammunition belts fed into defensive turrets, 2,000 rounds per aircraft. Pilots conducted pre-flight inspections, checking control surfaces, engine instruments, landing gear. Navigators finalized course calculations, accounting for predicted winds, fuel consumption, timing sequences to arrive over target in proper waves. Wireless operators tested radios, ensuring they could receive master bomber instructions during the chaos of attack. Gunners cleaned weapons, knowing German fighters would come. By nightfall, 596 bombers stood ready across dozens of airfields. Combined bomb load, 1,938 tons. That's 3,876,000 pounds of high explosives and incendiaries about to fall on a facility measuring 3 square miles. The mathematics suggested total destruction if the bombing was accurate, if intelligence about facility locations was correct, if German defenses didn't shoot down too many bombers before they could release their payloads, if the diversionary Berlin raid successfully drew night fighters away. Too many ifs for comfort. But war rarely offered certainty. The only certainty was that 4,200 British and Commonwealth airmen would fly into hostile airspace tonight, and statistics guaranteed not all would return. Group Captain Searby climbed into his Lancaster, settled into the pilot's seat, began the engine start sequence. Behind him, across dozens of airfields stretching from Yorkshire to Lincolnshire, hundreds of bombers fired up their Merlins and Hercules engines. The sound was apocalyptic, thousands of horsepower roaring across the countryside as dusk turned to night. One by one, heavy bombers taxied to runways, accelerated through takeoff rolls, lifted ponderously into darkening sky. They climbed to assembly altitudes, formed into streams separated by minutes and miles, turned east toward the North Sea. Below them, England disappeared into blackout darkness. Ahead lay 600 miles over hostile territory, a low-altitude bombing run through flak and possibly the entire German night fighter force, then 600 miles back if fuel and luck held. Somewhere in occupied France, Marie-Madeleine Fourcade was preparing to move headquarters again, staying one step ahead of Gestapo detection vans. Her network's intelligence had launched this armada. 596 bombers, 4,200 lives, nearly £4 million of explosives, all based on information extracted through conversation at Parisian social gatherings and transmitted via radios that exposed operators to capture within 25 minutes of each broadcast. Everything now depended on whether Jeannie Rousseau's photographic memory and social engineering skills had been accurate enough to justify the sacrifice about to unfold over Peenemünde. The bombers crossed the North Sea in darkness, maintaining radio silence, navigation lights extinguished. 200 miles of cold water separated England from the Danish coast. Inside each Lancaster and Halifax, 7 men performed specialized tasks they'd drilled thousands of times. Pilots held formation positions, making tiny corrections with control yokes. Navigators calculated drift from winds, updated estimated arrival times. Wireless operators monitored frequencies, listening for recall orders or tactical updates. Gunners scanned darkness through perspex turrets, searching for the silhouettes of German night fighters. Below, nothing but waves. Ahead, Germany. 11:20 p.m., August 17th. 8 Mosquito bombers approached Berlin from the south, flying at 370 miles per hour, fast enough to outrun most German fighters. German radar operators detected the formations immediately. Air raid sirens wailed across the capital. Night fighter squadrons scrambled from airfields around Berlin. Bf-110S and Ju-88S, equipped with Liechtenstein radar and 20mm cannon, hunting what appeared to be a major attack on Hitler's capital. The Mosquitoes dropped colored flares to maintain the illusion, scattered small bomb loads across the city, then hit maximum throttle and disappeared into the night at speeds the pursuing fighters couldn't match. The deception worked perfectly. German controllers had committed their night fighters to defending Berlin just as the main bomber stream approached Peenemünde, 90 miles to the north. The timing bought approximately 30 precious minutes before controllers realized the truth and redirected their squadrons. 12:17 a.m., August 18th. Group Captain John Searby descended to 8,000 feet over Peenemünde, his Lancaster illuminated by brilliant moonlight reflecting off the Baltic Sea. Below, the research facility sprawled along the coastline, darker shadows against dark landscape. He released colored marker flares over the experimental works where Werner von Braun's team designed rockets. Green smoke rose, marking the aiming point. Behind Searby, 227 heavy bombers of the first wave began their bombing runs. The first wave released 643 tons in less than 15 minutes. High explosive bombs cratered buildings, collapsed roofs, shattered concrete. Incendiaries ignited everything combustible: fuel stores, chemical laboratories, wooden structures. Fires erupted across the facility, flames visible from 20 miles away as munitions cooked off and storage tanks exploded. The experimental works, the scientific heart of the V2 program, began burning with intensity that would consume everything inside. Searby orbited through the chaos, watching bomb impacts through his aircraft's transparent nose section, radioing corrections to incoming waves. "Bomb the red markers, ignore the greens, come in from the east at 8,000 feet. Flak bursts erupted around his aircraft, black puffs of shrapnel that rocked the Lancaster with concussive force. His flight engineer called out damage reports. Searby ignored them, focused on directing the attack with unprecedented precision. The second wave targeted production facilities where Germany planned to manufacture operational V2 rockets. 113 bombers released 344 tons, concentrating on the massive F1 production hall, nearly complete and scheduled to begin manufacturing in September. Direct hits collapsed steel girders like children's toys. Concrete walls 3 feet thick crumbled under 1,000-pound bomb impacts. Assembly equipment melted in fires burning at temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The F1 facility that would have produced hundreds of rockets per month reduced to rubble in minutes. But reconnaissance photographs taken days later would reveal the true horror: some markers had fallen too far south. Bombs intended for the production facilities hit Trassenheide labor camp instead, where 500 to 600 forced workers, Poles, Russians, French, prisoners lived in barracks behind barbed wire. They'd been forced to build what the RAF was destroying. Now they died in explosions meant for their captors. War's terrible mathematics, collateral damage, unintended casualties, the cost of strategic necessity. Then the German night fighters arrived. Controllers in Berlin had finally recognized that Peenemünde, not the capital, was the real target. Every available squadron scrambled northward at maximum speed. The third wave, 174 bombers, carrying 501 tons, flew directly into a wall of Bf-110 SES and Ju-88S, attacking with the fury of pilots who'd been deceived. The Germans attacked from below and behind, exploiting the blind spot beneath British bombers where belly guns couldn't reach. 20mm cannon shells tore through aluminum fuselages, shredding hydraulic lines, puncturing fuel tanks, killing crew members. Tracer fire cut through darkness, orange streaks marking killing shots. Bombers caught fire, fell out of formation spinning, exploded when bomb loads detonated mid-air. Some crews bailed out, parachutes blossoming in firelight. Others went down with their aircraft, bodies never recovered from the Baltic Sea. The third wave suffered 23 aircraft shot down in less than 30 minutes of sustained combat, a massacre delivered by German pilots who'd flown 90 miles at full throttle, then attacked with vengeance. By 1:15 a.m., the last surviving bombers cleared the target area, turning west toward home. Behind them, Peenemünde burned. Fires consuming technical facilities, production buildings, housing settlements. The raid had delivered exactly what planners intended, 1,938 tons of explosives concentrated on 3 square miles. Bomb density averaged over 600 tons per square mile, saturation bombing designed to destroy everything within the target area. Group Captain Searby's Lancaster limped home with flak damage, hydraulics failing, but still flying. He'd orbited over Peenemünde for nearly an hour, directing the entire attack while German guns tried to kill him. His final broadcast before departing, extensive fires visible across entire target area, mission successful. Post-raid reconnaissance confirmed extensive damage. The experimental works where rockets were designed lay in ruins. The F-1 production facility was obliterated. Testing stands damaged. Administrative buildings burned. The harbor where supplies arrived was cratered, but the human cost reflected bombing's indiscriminate nature. 178 people died in the housing settlement, scientists, engineers, technicians, and their families. Among the dead, Dr. Walter Thiel, chief propulsion engineer for the V-2 program, killed in his air raid shelter along with his wife and children. Thiel's death removed one of the program's most brilliant minds. Irreplaceable expertise lost in a single night. The final accounting came at dawn as surviving bombers landed at English bases. 40 aircraft failed to return, 23 shot down by night fighters, 12 destroyed by flak, 5 lost to operational accidents or fuel exhaustion. 6.7% casualties exceeded the acceptable 5% threshold but remained well below worst-case predictions of 60 to 80 losses. 40 bombers meant 280 aircrew killed or captured. 280 men who'd flown 600 miles through hostile territory, bombed at 8,000 feet through flak and fire, fought off night fighters, then died before reaching home. George Dunn's Halifax crew survived, completing their 17th mission. 13 more to go. General Walter Dornberger, military commander of the Peenemünde program, surveyed damage after dawn. Serious damage, contrary to first impressions, was surprisingly small, he wrote later, German understatement masking strategic reality. The experimental works were destroyed. The F-1 production facility obliterated. Testing operations disrupted. Key personnel killed. Supply chains interrupted. Most critically, German engineers who'd believed Peenemünde was beyond Allied reach now knew nowhere was safe. Post-war historians concluded Operation Hydra delayed the V-2 program 2 to 3 months. Not stopped. Delayed. But those months mattered because of timing. V-1 attacks began June 13, 1944, 1 week after D-Day. 10,492 launched over following months. 6,184 British civilians killed. 17,981 seriously injured. September 8, 1944, the first V-2 ballistic missile struck London. No warning, no engine sound. Just sudden explosion as the rocket descended from space at supersonic speed. Over the next 7 months, approximately 9,000 V-2s launched. 2,754 killed in London alone. 9 to 12,000 total deaths across Britain and continental Europe. Horrible casualties. Devastating to families. But those deaths occurred after D-Day succeeded. Eisenhower's assessment: were the Germans able to perfect these new weapons 6 months earlier, our invasion would have encountered enormous difficulties and in certain circumstances would not have been possible now. 6 months earlier than September 1944 meant March 1944. V-weapons would have destroyed British ports, airfields, supply depots during the critical invasion build-up. The 2 to 3 month delay brought by Operation Hydra, paid for with 40 bombers and 280 airmen, created the window that made D-Day possible. Alliance kept transmitting. Fourcade's network identified V-1 launch sites across northern France. Operation Crossbow flew 68,913 missions based on Alliance intelligence. The network bled agents weekly, hundreds arrested, tortured, executed. By July 1944, the Gestapo was finally closing in on the Hedgehog herself. July 1943, Aix-en-Provence, southern France. Vichy police arrested Marie-Madeleine Fourcade while she reviewed intelligence reports in a safe house. They didn't recognize her, just another suspected resistance member for routine questioning. She provided a false identity, claimed to be a secretary for a shipping company, maintained the deception through hours of interrogation. The police suspected she was lying, but lacked proof. They transferred her to a prison cell to await further investigation while they checked her story. The cell measured 10 feet by 8 feet with a single barred window near the ceiling. The bars were set 18 inches apart, standard prison construction based on the assumption that no adult human could possibly fit through such a narrow gap. The guards underestimated her desperation. That night, after final rounds, Fourcade removed all her clothing. Time, 0.5s. She'd done the calculations. Fabric bunching would add crucial inches to her body width, making an already impossible escape attempt even more impossible. Naked, she dragged the cell's single wooden chair beneath the window, climbed up, gripped the cold iron bars. She forced her head between them first, skull barely fitting through the gap. Then shoulders. The metal bars scraped skin from her ribs as she contorted her torso through the opening. Her hips stuck. She pushed harder, ignoring searing pain as iron gouged flesh. Blood made the bars slippery. Finally, her legs came through. She dropped 15 feet to hard ground outside the prison wall, landed badly. Lay motionless for several seconds, listening for alarms, shouts, gunfire, silence. Then she stood, naked, bleeding, in occupied France with no clothes, no documents, no money, no safe house within miles. She walked through darkened streets toward a contact's address she'd memorized months earlier, praying that person still lived there, praying they wouldn't turn her away or turn her in. She knocked. The door opened. Her contact stared in shock at the naked, bleeding woman on the doorstep, then pulled her inside quickly. Within 48 hours, Fourcade was in a new location, coordinating network operations as if nothing had happened. Kenneth Cohen, her MI6 controller, received the escape report with equal measures of amazement and exasperation. He'd told her months earlier, according to the law of averages, an underground leader can't last more than 6 months. She'd survived over 2 years and had just escaped from prison naked. But London insisted she evacuate. Too dangerous. The Gestapo had her physical description. Every day in France increased recapture risk. February 1944, a Lysander aircraft picked her up from a moonlit field and flew her to England. She briefed British intelligence, provided detailed reports on V-weapon sites Alliance had identified, then argued strenuously for permission to return. MI6 refused. Too dangerous. Her capture would compromise the entire network. She refused to accept their refusal. July 21, 1944, 6 weeks after D-Day, Marie-Madeleine Fourcade, was smuggled back into France aboard a motor gun boat landing on the Brittany coast. She'd convinced British intelligence that Alliance needed her direct leadership. She'd lied. What she actually needed was to be with her agents, sharing danger, leading from the front, rather than the safety of London headquarters. The Gestapo had intensified operations as German military fortunes deteriorated. By summer 1944, Alliance had suffered catastrophic casualties. 438 agents arrested and executed between 1941 and 1945. Hundreds more imprisoned in concentration camps. Many killed during interrogation before formal execution. The network that once operated openly across France now functioned through paranoid operational security. Headquarters moving every few days, radio operators changing locations after every transmission, agents using forged documents requiring constant updates. Gianni Russo was captured April 1944 while attempting evacuation to England, betrayed by a double agent who'd infiltrated the escape network. The Gestapo interrogated her for weeks in Paris, suspecting she was a spy but lacking proof of specific intelligence activities. She admitted nothing. They sent her to Ravensbrück concentration camp in northern Germany, then to Königsberg, then to Torgau. Moved repeatedly as punishment for organizing prisoner protests and maintaining morale among other inmates. She survived all three camps, enduring conditions deliberately designed to kill through starvation, disease, and systematic brutality. R.V. Jones, the British physicist who'd analyzed her intelligence reports, later wrote, AMNIARIX's reports stand brilliantly in the history of intelligence, and three concentration camps, Ravensbrück, Königsberg, and Torgau, could not break her. Alliance operations continued even as the network bled. Radio operators kept transmitting V1 launch site coordinates, those distinctive sky sites with curved launching ramps that Alliance agents identified across northern France. American and British bombers flew Operation Crossbow missions based on that intelligence, 68,913 sorties between 1943 and 1945, 44,702 by the U.S. 8th Air Force, 24,211 by the RAF. Massive resource diversion from other strategic targets, but necessary to suppress V-weapon deployment further. The mathematical legacy crystallized through casualty calculations. V-weapons killed approximately 9,000 to 12,000 people across Britain and continental Europe between June 1944 and March 1945. Horrible casualties, devastating to families. But those deaths occurred after D-Day succeeded. The invasion launched June 6, 1944, with 156,000 Allied troops landing on Normandy beaches. It succeeded because British ports weren't cratered by ballistic missiles, airfields weren't destroyed, supply depots weren't burning, troop concentrations weren't decimated before embarkation. Eisenhower's post-war assessment: were the Germans able to perfect these new weapons 6 months earlier? It was likely that our invasion of Europe would have encountered enormous difficulties and, in certain circumstances, would not have been possible. 6 months earlier than September 1944 meant March 1944. V-2 rockets would have systematically targeted Southampton, Portsmouth, Dover, the ports where invasion forces assembled. Airfields across southern England would have been struck by weapons traveling 3,500 miles per hour with no warning and no defense. Supply depots stockpiling invasion equipment would have been destroyed. Troop concentration areas would have been hit by ballistic missiles carrying 1-ton warheads. The calculation: if Germany launched 2,000 V-1s daily as planned, starting March 1944, that equals 180,000 weapons over 3 months before D-Day. Even assuming only 50% reached targets, that's 90,000 explosions hitting British infrastructure. Add V-2 strikes, the invasion would have been cancelled or postponed to 1945, extending the war by a year or more, adding hundreds of thousands of additional casualties. Alliance's intelligence prevented that scenario. Rousseau's social engineering extracted specifications enabling Operation Hydra. Fourcade's network identified launch sites enabling Operation Crossbow. Radio operators transmitted coordinates despite knowing each broadcast risked Gestapo detection vans triangulating their positions within 25 minutes. Agents died by hundreds, arrested, tortured, executed, to provide intelligence that delayed V-weapon deployment by critical months. Direct calculation, alliance, intelligence enabled bombing campaigns that delayed V weapons, which allowed D-Day to proceed on schedule, which prevented an estimated 100,000 to 200,000 additional casualties from either V weapon strikes on invasion preparation or from prolonging the war through 1945. Fourcade survived the war, remained in France after liberation, wrote memoirs, received the Légion d'honneur and the British King's Medal for courage. But for decades, her story remained unknown outside intelligence circles. Male resistance leaders were celebrated. Jean Moulin, Henri Frenay became household names. Fourcade, who commanded more agents and provided more strategic intelligence, was footnoted if mentioned at all. Jeannie Rousseau lived to 98, dying in 2017 after a long life rarely discussing wartime activities. When asked why she'd risked everything, she responded with genuine confusion, "I don't understand the question. It was a moral obligation to do what you are capable of doing. It was a must. How could you not do it?" That moral clarity defined both women. July 1941, 31-year-old Fourcade inherited command when every probability said a woman couldn't lead such an operation. Germans assumed Hedgehog was male. Allied commanders hesitated, trusting her. Statistical survival rates said she'd be captured within 6 months. She operated for 4 years, survived 2 Gestapo captures, escaped once naked through prison bars, commanded 3,000 agents, provided intelligence that changed the war's outcome. The mathematical certainty said it was impossible. One woman with primitive radios couldn't defeat Nazi Germany's industrial capacity. Low-tech intelligence couldn't enable precision military operations. Social engineering couldn't extract specifications accurate enough to guide bombing raids. Every probability said Fourcade would fail. The probability was wrong. Over 4 years, Alliance's courage and Fourcade's leadership produced intelligence enabling Operation Hydra, 596 bombers, 1,938 tons, 2 to 3 month delay, D-Day preserved, estimated 100 to 200,000 lives saved. The Hedgehog outlasted the Reich. The impossible became fact. One French resistance woman's radios saved 100 Allied bombers, and far, far more than that. In occupied France, hunted by Gestapo, transmitting via primitive technology under constant surveillance, facing statistical certainty of execution, Marie-Madeleine Fourcade proved that courage, intelligence, and moral clarity can defeat industrial-scale tyranny. The woman who shouldn't be there changed history. The impossible became real, and history belongs to those who refused to accept that it couldn't be done.